We are here with the NFL draft guru to end all gurus, the Athletics, Dane Brugler. Dane, love having you on. Love chatting with you. What's college football season look like for you so far?
Yeah, thanks, David. Man, it's been a fun September because a lot of the players we thought were going to be in the mix at the top of the draft board, they're playing well. But we've also had some players maybe on the other side not play so well. We're still trying to figure out this quarterback class. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot going on in college football as it pertains to the draft that we're still figuring out, but a lot of things we need to talk about as well.
You mentioned Ryan Williams. People can't get enough of this guy right now. People can't get enough of talking about how he's 17, all of these things. He's a little bit a ways away from being on the NFL draft radar. But Dane, your early impressions of this kid, are you as wowed as everyone else is at what he's doing at this age, at this stage in his career?
I mean, how could you not? I mean, did you know he was 17 years old? I just heard that.
I've
That's
heard that. I
crazy.
got to confirm it.
Yeah.
I need to hear it 150 more times, but maybe.
I mean, it is astonishing that he's doing this at I mean, think about where we were at 17 years old, and it's just kind of bizarre. But I mean, you look at Jeremiah Smith, what he's doing in Columbus for the Buckeyes. You
Hmm.
look, I mean, it's kind of crazy how good some of these players are, and it makes you get you excited for okay, what's it going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, when they continue to grow into their bodies and just become much better players. What they put on film so far is, I mean, I promise you that play at the end of the Alabama Georgia game was probably the number of NFL GMs who texted one another about that play. I mean that's how you want to get noticed by NFL teams, and Ryan Williams certainly has done that. So it looks like he has kind of the total package with the speed, the body control. I mean, it's just rare receiving instincts. I cannot. I make it a rule of mine not to really focus on freshmen because I only have so much room in my
Yeah.
brain. I can't really watch the non-draft eligible guys. But how could you not with a guy like Williams and that talent?
Yeah, he tends to jump off the screen just a little bit. Just a little bit. Jalen Milroe, an interesting prospect, but when you look at him so far fitting into Kalen DeBoer's offense, what have they done to bring out the best in him and draw some buzz about him at the next level as well?
Yeah, I mean, on that field Saturday night, with some of the best athletes in the sport, Milroe just looked like he was moving at a different speed. He
Yeah.
is so dynamic because of the ways he can stress a defense. There's just so many ways he can beat you, and I think in terms of comfort level, he looks like a very different player now compared to the guy we saw against Michigan in the Rose Bowl. Specifically with DeBoer's offense and this new coaching staff, I think we're seeing a lot more movement, a lot of different route combinations that's designed to spread out the defense. And I mean, you watch this game against Georgia, and Milroe did a great job taking what the defense was giving him. Okay, you have the post covered, you've got the comeback cover, or I just hit the tight end in the flat. I mean, he had a good feel for where to go based off of the way he was reading the defense, and that comes from preparation, understanding what the defense is trying to do and understand, okay, this is covered, boom, this is where I need to go, and do this all in a quick, 2.5 seconds. And credit to the Alabama offensive line. I think they've played outstanding this year. If we're going to talk Joe Moore Award, they're somewhere in the top 3 so far. And it's just a big improvement from last year where things were still moving a little too fast for him. As a passer, it's just there's not as much panic with Milroe.
Hmm.
That spectacular Ryan Williams catch. He saw the single coverage and said, "My guy's better than yours. I'm going to attack it." And he's still a work in progress in some areas, and honestly, he might always be. Who knows? But it just feels like this offense has really clicked for him, which has allowed him to be more comfortable from the pocket.
When you mentioned him processing and seeing what the defense is doing and understanding the total picture, are there other places that you've seen him improve from what you saw from him last year and so far in the first month of this season?
I think he has been more consistent down the field. And I made the comparison last week. I wrote an article about comparing him to Jalen Hurts, and
Hmm.
I think that's something you see with their games. How down the field they can really hurt you. Something Jalen Hurts is known for, and then you watch that Wisconsin tape, and Milroe was outstanding, throwing that. Both of his touchdowns were perfectly placed balls with pace down the field. And I think that's, we know he has a big arm. He's always had that. But I think it's more consistent with his downfield accuracy this year. And that's where the comparison with Hurts comes in. And they both, in terms of size, 6'1", 225, thickly built athletes. And again, they might not be the traditional passers, but they are dynamic and they play to their strengths. And just going back to that Georgia game, that wheel route that Milroe threw was outstanding.
Mm-hmm. You look at this quarterback class. Where does it stand right now for you, and where does Milroe, rank in there when you talk about Carson Beck, you talk about Shedeur, those guys? How do those shake out for you as currently stands with 2/3 of the season left to play?
Quarterback 1 is up for grabs. I mean, who wants it? That's basically what the next 2 months are going to be.
Mm-hmm.
With Milroe, he has put together a strong audition here in the first month of the season, saying, "Hey, I'm your guy." On the flip side of that, I mean, you look at, if scouts only watched that game Saturday night and nothing else, Georgia-Alabama game, they would come away saying, okay, well, Milroe's a first rounder and Carson Beck is a third rounder at best. I mean, but obviously that's not how this works. It's about body of work, how guys perform over the course of their careers. But how guys perform in the biggest games, that matters. And watching Beck last year, it was refreshing to see a quarterback who got better with each game. He played confident, got the ball in the hands of his playmakers. But with that said, it was up and down against Alabama last year. And he said he came back to school. Part of the reason is because of how that loss to Alabama felt. He played, and so coming back, that was kind of circled on the calendar for him. He played the worst game of his career this past weekend against Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So he looked like a guy that was missing the Brock Bowers cheat code to beat the big bad boss at the end of the level. And that's something where, okay, if you don't have a Brock Bowers to throw to, if you don't have Ladd McConkey to throw to, can you make everybody else around you better? And I mean, even when Georgia was coming back in the second half of that game, a lot of his throws were just chucking 50-50 balls downfield, and they worked until they didn't, and that interception ended the game. But the comeback was good to see, but overall it was a poor performance. And so, did he look like a future NFL starter in that game? No. But they're still early in the process. Can he go out and perform at a high level the rest of the season, lead Georgia into the playoffs, and can he change the narrative? Because bottom line, when scouts talk about Beck, they want to know, okay, what is your distinguishing trait that tells us you're going to be a top-level pro? He's solid across the board. Decent-sized athlete, decent arm, throws a catchable ball. But what is that distinguishing trait that NFL teams want to invest a early pick on you and that say, okay, you're going to help us compete for the division? I'm not sure teams are convinced he has that yet, which really clouds his draft status moving forward. So we got Milroe. I mean, Shedeur Sanders is in there. Cam Ward from Miami has made a really nice push to be up there. I mean, could he be this year's Jaden Daniels, where preseason we're talking about him, 3rd, 4th round pick, but the way he plays in his final year. And we have to remember with Cam Ward, he was wing T in high school, and then he goes to, a version of the air raid in Incarnate Word, and then a similar thing at Washington State. And okay, so it's a new offense at Miami and showing us something a little bit different. The biggest thing for Ward, because we know he's elusive in the pocket. The way he can sling the football is a lot of fun. He creates big plays, but it's the turnover worthy plays that are the red flag. That's where he needs to fix things. That's where he needs to be better, because in the NFL, he'll continue to develop at the next level, but teams aren't going to have patience with you if you're turning the ball over. They're not going to allow you to go out there and get the reps you need to get better if you're turning the ball over 2 to 3 times a game. So it'll be really interesting with Cam Ward if he can fix that the rest of the year. I don't know that the ACC is that daunting of a conference this year in terms of defensive play, where they're going to be able to really limit him and what he's able to do. But even on the Florida tape was great for him, but he still had a couple turnover worthy plays on that tape. So it's all about taking care of the football the rest of the year in order for him to really cement himself as a guy teams will consider in the first round.
Shifting gears, one of our favorite players on this podcast, Ashton Jeanty from Boise State. You had an all-22 clip of five of his best runs against Washington State. That game was unreal. It's as good as he looked against Oregon. I think he may have looked better against Washington State. What have been your impressions of him, and what does his NFL future stock draft outlook look like at this point?
You know, in baseball, how umpires have to check pitchers when they come off the mound for any foreign substances. I wonder if the refs need to start doing that with Boise games and check Genty's jersey for baby oil or something that would make more sense for what he's able to do breaking all these tackles. I mean, yeah, the game he had Saturday night against Washington State, it looked like someone took Barry Sanders highlights and put them on a blue field. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time, and I've never watched a running back tape that had more missed tackles at the college level than what I saw Saturday. Part of it was horrible tackling, no doubt. But and he's doing this every game though, and so at a certain point, it's about the player. He's forcing these missed tackles. He's so dang strong. The contact balance is elite. I love his reactionary reads. I mean, he does not predetermine his path. He's able to make these sudden changes based on what's in front of him, and that's what helps lead to these chunk plays. So, I think that, coming into the season, there was maybe, okay, is he fast enough? Sometimes pursuit catches up to him. He's clocking over 21 miles an hour on the field in terms of just speed. Some will say, oh, he's too short. Honestly, he might be the perfect running back size because his stature, he can hide behind blocks, he runs low to the ground, and that helps make him so productive. So you add in that he is absolutely beloved, and I mean beloved, in that Boise community, by the program, by the coaching staff. He had some big NIL opportunities this year, talking about, close to $1 million, and he decided to go back to Boise. I mean, he said that was his community. He wasn't done there. I mean, his background's a lot of fun, just, coming where he came from and all that. But he's one of the most fun players that I studied over the summer. I mean, easy running back one for me going into the year. And so far, he's only helped that projection. I mean, this is a first round player. It's just a matter of how high does he go.
Outside of just being Derrick Henry, what is there a science to being so good at breaking tackles? Because I think you're right. I haven't seen a guy that seems this hard to get down. Why is that the case with him?
He's built so low to the ground that I think it's just it becomes physics, right? It becomes my ability to I have my balance, I have my quick twitch, short area athleticism, but also if you don't square me up perfectly and hold on, I'm going to be able to squirm out of your attempt. And against half-hearted tackle attempts at the college level, he makes it look easy. Now, obviously, it'll be tougher against better competition. Would love to see Boise make a run to the playoffs this year, just to see how he does against an Ohio State. How would he do against a Texas and Alabama, one of these teams? But he is a guy that something else that really stands out about him is, and this is why my comparison for him is actually LaDainian Tomlinson, who is a Hall of Famer, and I hate putting that on a guy. But the way he moves, the way he breaks tackles, but also the way that, and this doesn't get talked about nearly enough, is him as a pass catcher. He is a big time threat as a receiver, just like LaDainian was, that dual threat ability. So it's going to be interesting to see just how high he goes. 2 years ago, we saw Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs go top 13. If Jeanty were in that class, where does he fit? Maybe for some teams he'd be running back one. Maybe for other teams he would have been the third guy. I think it's just a matter of what exactly you want. But from a scouting standpoint, he is absolutely one of the most fun watches you'll have all year.
One of the more interesting prospects, that we've seen in the sport, Travis Hunter. What does his future look like in the NFL, and how do you think teams will use him?
Yeah, with Travis, he looks different. He looks like he's playing at a different speed than everybody else on the field, and I mean that both athletically and mentally. He has an outstanding football IQ, and he trusts his instincts. So there's no thinking with how he plays. It's just reacting. And because he puts himself in these good positions, he's able to make plays. So I think he deserves so much credit for not only the stamina to play both ways, but I don't think most understand the just the commitment, the focus, the intelligence it takes to handle both responsibilities. You have to know the offensive playbook. You have to know the defense and the inner workings of the coverage. You have to spend time in the receiver meeting room. You're spending time with the defensive coaches. And he plays them on special teams too. So I mean, there's a reason why this is so rare. You have to
Mhm.
be a super athlete, yes, but also super committed, because the mental side of this is just extremely taxing as well. And I get questions every weekend about, okay, is he a receiver or is he a cornerback at the next level? And I think uh, first thing that NFL teams are going to have to do is find out straight from Hunter, which position do you prefer? My guess would be receiver, just because most kids want the ball in their hands,
Well, he likes.
understandably.
I profiled him last year. He likes defense. I think he's better at receiver right now, but he wants to play defense. He's like
I,
obsessed with Jalen Ramsey and Dion and their skills as a corner. But I think he looks to me a little bit more natural as a
mhm.
receiver. But you're right. You look at all his picks, especially. They all come off of these insane football IQ plays. He's fascinating to watch defensively, but I don't know if you spend a first round draft pick on a guy, you probably can't play him 130 snaps, but he's probably going to want to play both sides. Some you play him like half and half. I don't know. Will that depend on just like what team drafts him in those conversations leading into the draft?
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there will be no prospect will be talked about more than Travis Hunter, and what
Mm-hmm.
position and all of that. How are you going to use them? The thing is, in the NFL, there is no such thing as a two position player. It just doesn't exist. I mean, you have some players have a primary position, and then they have a secondary position. That does exist.
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm an NFL team, I want to know, okay, how badly do you want to play both ways? And I want you to play on defense, because it's just harder to find these guys with that combination of athleticism, smarts, ball skills. But it's also easier for him to be full-time defense and then sprinkle in, hey, we'll give you 10, 15, 17 snaps a game on offense,
Yeah.
as opposed to the other side where, okay, you're a full-time receiver and then we'll sprinkle you in on defense. I mean, that's just not going to work as smoothly. So if I'm an NFL team, I'm going to try and, okay, if you really want to play both ways, all right, well, full time a corner. But if you want to be a receiver, you can't ignore that. So full time corner, and we'll have a design plays for you, a certain number of packages every single game, and see how that works out. I think regardless, he's going to be a high pick. I mean, he was number 3
Mm-hmm.
overall in my preseason top 50. It won't be surprising at all if he's the number one non-quarterback drafted this year.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows if that could be the number one pick, number two pick, but he's going to go high.
Mm-hmm. What do you make of what you've seen from Shedeur this year?
Naturally accurate, coming off a really good performance against UCF. Not a big guy. I mean, scouts measured him at 6'1", 198 in the spring. He's up to around 210 now, but size-wise, not super impressive. Arm is B plus in terms of velocity, but he can make all the throws. Accuracy stands out in a really positive way. And I think
Mm-hmm.
maybe what you love most about him, just the poise and the toughness. He's a cool customer. He'll stand in the face of pressure, make throws. Sometimes he will hold the ball too long. Sometimes he bails from clean pockets. You wonder how much scar tissue is there, just because of the offensive line and the situation at Colorado, where it feels like he has to do everything in terms of buying time and reading out the defense. But the other thing too is, whenever I bring up Shedeur with scouts, they always mention how important the interview process will be, and it's that way for every quarterback. But it's going to be make or break for Shedeur. I mean, Dion has already said they're going to steer the draft in a way so Shedeur is drafted by the right team. Which, as you know, in the NFL, you don't love to hear that.
Yeah.
How is Shedeur going to gel in a veteran locker room of
Yeah.
28, 30-year-old guys? You can't point fingers in an NFL locker room and expect things to work out. So talent-wise, Shedeur is a player teams will consider uh, in the first round. But
Yeah.
the interviews are ultimately what's going to determine, okay, do we feel comfortable drafting him as early as the top 10, top 20? I mean, that's really the interview process, and making sure ownership, front office, coaching staff, the entire organization is on board with investing that high of a pick in him.
Dane, you're the best at doing this. I love the beast. I love your coverage. Nobody is more thorough than you. We got to dig into that knowledge. Who is the under the radar prospect that you're falling in love with right now that people are not talking about enough that's going to be a major player in the draft conversations after the season?
So definitely have a few that I really like. I mean, Iowa State has two really good receivers. Jaden Higgins, the bigger, Noel's the other one, a fun player, but Jaden
Mm-hmm.
Higgins, 6'4", good size receiver. And you see what like Nico Collins is doing right now for the Texans. Teams
Yeah.
want that bigger receiver who can box out corners, but then also gives you yak, has speed. Can Jaden Higgins from Iowa State be that guy this year? He has a lot going on for him. A big fan of Trey Harris, the receiver at Ole Miss. I
Mm-hmm.
don't think he's talked about nearly enough.
Crazy numbers this year too.
Yeah, in that offense with Jackson Dart throwing the football, for sure. I'm a big fan. Texas. Obviously, Quinn Ewers gets talked about a lot. Banks, the left tackle, gets talked about a lot. The right tackle might be the best prospect on that team. The
Interesting.
right tackle might be the first Texas player drafted in April. That's how good he is, Williams. I mean, he's 335 pounds and he moves like he's 235 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
So he's raw. This is his first year as a full-time starter. But teams will bet on the traits, and he really
Yeah.
stands out in that area. So Texas is a team that's going to be in the mix all the way through to the end. Keep an eye on that right tackle because he is a big time performer.
Well, Dane, thank you for coming on. I love talking to you about this stuff because anytime I've done talking to you, I feel like I've learned something and I am more educated than I was when the conversation began. I hope our listeners feel the same. Thanks for joining us, Dane Brugler. We'll catch you very, very soon, man. We have a very special guest today, our newest colleague, the newest senior national reporter at The Athletic for college football, Ralph Russo. Welcome, Ralph. It's great to have you. You come to us from the Associated Press, where you worked since before the invention of Twitter. I think close to the invention of Facebook. Before that, right? I think that's
It was
right.
definitely before the invention of Twitter, without question. So
Yes.
two different stints at the AP. I've been there for about 20 years on this stint.
Mm-hmm.
Had a little interruption where I worked at the Denver Post, and had another, about 8 or 9 years before that, at the start of my career. Oh gosh, even more than that. Yeah, I'm even messing up. Here's the best way to describe it. I've been in the business for 31 years. 29 of them have been with the Associated Press.
That sounds good. Well, right now we're not going to ask you
Super
for your
old.
Uber Eats order. We're not going to get your Uber Eats order, but we are going to ask you about the story you wrote involving the SEC and the Big Ten's reported scheduling partnership, what that means in the grand scheme of college football. And you and I, we've each got 3 takes on the first month of the season. We're going to trade takes, and I'm going to tell you why yours are wrong and mine are better. Ralph, before we get to the SEC and the Big Ten, though, we had some more realignment news. Tuesday morning, Gonzaga's in the Pac-12. They're going to join in all sports, but not football since they don't have a football program. Some would argue that Rutgers joined the Big Ten without a football program, but they have since fixed that issue. The Pac-12 not quite at 8 full-time members yet, though. Ralph, who could be next in this league?
So I do think they're trying to still get into Texas. I also think that the reason why the Pac-12 has maybe, I don't know, like slowed down, I think it is sort of the perception. And frankly, I think that they would bristle at that perception that they have slowed down since the UNLV thing didn't work out, since the AAC poaching did not work out. I think that what they're shifting to now is the idea that, listen, we've been sort of projecting some figures to try to lure people into our conference as far as TV money. Now we've got 7. Now we've got Gonzaga. Maybe we can go to the networks and get a little bit firmer numbers to do one of 2 things. Either Texas State or someone like that look toward the state of Texas, grab a school that's more readily available. I also think that there's a possibility that the Pac-12 could circle back around on some of those AAC schools. Now, that's not to mean that they'll be successful a second time, but I do wonder if like a UTSA which is not making as much because they're a relatively new member in the AAC, could be receptive to a second pass. So I think those are their options there. I think they're very much looking at like, hey, how can we get into Texas in some kind of central time zone, and maybe going from we're just projecting what our value is to, hey, we've talked to some potential TV partners, and now we have a firmer idea of what we could be getting. And they sell that to the potential new members as, and here's what we would be valued if you came along.
Yeah. It looks like UTEP is going to be joining the Mountain West, which in this day and age, I will take a move that does not make me bristle geographically. I did win the geography bee in 6th grade. So anytime that I can look at that and say, oh, that makes sense, it makes my heart a little full. What do people need to know about that move, Ralph?
So I think the interesting part of that is the Conference USA, which UTEP is moving out of, has a grant of rights. And I know that term gets thrown around a lot in college sports, right? It's at the center of everything that's going on with the ACC right now in those lawsuits. It's working a little differently in Conference USA, where they don't have massive media rights deals, right? So buying their way out of a grant of rights, whereas it would cost Florida State $500 million to do it early with a contract that runs through a television contract that runs through 2036. In Conference USA, it's a little unclear exactly. I think our colleagues have reported about $8 million might need to be exchanged for them to break some of this deal. But again, it's a little more manageable. The idea of a grant of rights being just, practically signing over your life is different in with Conference USA. And you're right, it gets them, frankly, UTEP is the outlier in Conference USA now geographically. This gets them more aligned with geographic partners. And maybe the next step is New Mexico State, if you want to add one more, because that again creates another rivalry with New Mexico and UTEP.
At least we're still living in sanity land geographically.
Yeah.
It looks like the SEC and the Big Ten are going to meet next week in Nashville to talk about a number of things, a scheduling partnership and the ideal auto bid model when the next college football playoff rolls around in 2026. We still don't know what that's going to look like. 14, 16, we'll see. In February, Ralph, they made a joint advisory committee.
Yeah. And
people's red flags, their tinfoil hats went up, that there's a lot of ideas about what the SEC and Big Ten want to do to make things a sport that already is tilted in their favor, more tilted in their favor. You wrote a little bit about this, Ralph. What did you write? And if you're a fan of a team that is not in the Big Ten and not in the SEC, how concerned should you be about these closed-door meetings in Nashville?
Yeah, I think there should be a fair amount of concern just on the idea that the SEC and the Big Ten are sort of building a castle around them, maybe even with a moat, with crocodiles in it. Like
I've heard these moats can go poorly for people. So yeah,
yeah, I think the more they sort of wall themselves off and partner, the more you end up sort of perpetuating this, kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of we're the best conference is. And if we lock everybody else out, then you don't have a chance to sort of grow into being at our level, right? Because we're keeping all of our value under one roof. The reason why the playoff thing and the scheduling thing mesh, I think they're looking for opportunity. I'll give you an example, David. USC, Texas, USC, LSU, Texas, Michigan. Before this weekend, and I'm not sure if we have numbers out yet on Georgia, Alabama, that may blow them both away. But those were the two largest audiences to watch games in the first 4 weeks of the season. So when you're the Big Ten and SEC, you go, well, maybe we should play more non-conference games. Maybe we can create a Big Ten SEC challenge like we see in basketball. Right?
Yeah.
Two reasons. A, maybe we can create a package that we can bring to market of new games. Harder to do that, right? Because there are existing contracts right now. Plus, I think there's about 30 SEC Big Ten games scheduled over the next couple of years already.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if ESPN is going to want to pay more for something that they already own, or Fox for that matter, Fox, NBC, and those. The other way you create some revenue out of that and Big Ten SEC Challenge is, hey, maybe the Athletic wants to sponsor it, right? or maybe maybe Goodyear or just whatever, right? You get a sponsor and it's not as big. You don't get as much revenue as maybe creating another television package, but you in some way create a new revenue stream out of this SEC Big Ten Challenge, right? That maybe you can go through every year.
Do you think we get to a place where they get those 4 automatic bids? You expand to maybe we'll say 14 for the sake of just doomsday. Yeah. And you have 4 SEC, 4 Big Ten, and the rest of college football gets to fight over 6. Do you think that we get to that finish line and they can get the other conferences to I say agree. I'll say the more accurate term would probably be acquiesce.
Yeah, it is more acquiesce because that's the way the system is set up now. They don't need a situation where you have unanimous support for a change of the CFP once the 2026 contract goes into place. So a couple of different things there. First of all, I don't think they're signing up for an SEC Big Ten Challenge, either conference, and making those schedules even more tough unless they know, hey, we have a certain amount of access to the CFP that we can guarantee that. So making our schedules tougher isn't going to be working against us. Yeah. There's also an element of the Big Ten waiting for the SEC to go to 9 conference games, right? So
which they should and have been dragging their feet on for several years.
And that, again, could be a money thing. It's always a money thing, right? It's always a money thing. So I think where the two things are related, the scheduling and the auto bids, is we would be more likely to do the scheduling thing if we can get the auto bids in place. Then I think what happens is, again, they can't do this completely on their own, but they kind of can. They kind of can force it through. I also wonder how much you're looking for 2024 and 2025 results to sort of say to the Big 10, the Big 12 and the ACC, hey guys, you might get 1. So maybe let's talk about you getting 2, maybe, or some situation where we put in some measures where, hey, if you hit these targets in your ranking, you get 2. So I think we are heading there. I think when they pushed for that in the spring, it seemed like bullying, and it kind of was. But it was also posturing to like, well, listen, we're more important. What's more important, we're going to get more revenue, right? So we'll drop the auto bids conversation for now. We got the more revenue. Okay, now we got that taken care of. That was really the priority. Now let's circle back on the auto bids part of it and see what we can do there. And again, I think that might be easier to sell if you are also living in a world where the Big 12 just got 1.
Yeah,
became a single bid league.
It's really interesting to me. You talk about the Sluka conversation last week, and what solves that? Player contracts. Well, if we're gonna have player contracts, that means revenue sharing. Well, if we're gonna have revenue share, it's gonna cut into our budget. Well, we got to grow our budget. That's where these playoff conversations come in. All these conversations weave together in college sports. If you look at the big picture, you said it, Ralph. It all comes back to money. And the budgets of these places have been broken for quite some time, and they're going to squeeze as much money out of it as possible. And that means what I will generously call playoff chicanery. How about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it, right? And again, it's this idea of, boy, we make a lot of money in these 2 conferences. How can we now work together to make more because we're bringing our value together? But again, the other thing you're doing is you're squeezing out the rest, right?
Yeah.
And I think the biggest fear with all of this, Dave, is at what point have you marginalized fan bases at the broader scope of college football that you don't want to do that to? Like, what happens when the folks in Stillwater go, Like, do we have a shot at any of this stuff? Like, where are we in the, I think a bigger tent of college football is probably better than a smaller one. And, it's one, this is no offense. It's one thing to squeeze out Boise, and it's one thing to squeeze out Fresno State or the MAC. You can make some arguments that they are not the same as these power conferences.
Yeah.
When you start looking to squeeze out like Pitt and Georgia Tech and Kansas State, like, what are we doing here? Like, how small does the tent need to be, and how much is so much that you guys have to capture it all to hold on to? And it goes back to what you said. Well, right now, yes, we need every penny, and if it means trampling the ACC and the Big 12 to get it, I guess that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, we'll get to our takes in a second here, Ralph. I think my question is, like, do we ever get to that breaking point where people have had enough and you lose those fans? Because the ratings seem to continue going up. And part of me wonders if the people who weren't going to watch college football anymore because of NIL are the same people who weren't going to watch college football because of realignment. I'm wondering if these people exist. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not so sure. I think we'll see. I worry about it, but I don't know. When you draw in casuals, do you lose the hardcore? I think time will let us know what that is.
So my last word on that, David, I'm with you. Like, I think that all this stuff is BS. Like, I don't think very many. I think the people who are stepping away for those things are minuscule and are easily replaced by the next wave of college football fans who don't know anything but that world. I think this is the more pressing issue in terms of squeezing your audience, because the folks who root for Oklahoma State will also show up and watch Georgia, Alabama.
Yeah.
But how much will they show up and watch Georgia, Alabama if they are no longer tethered in any way to that game? If they have no real, if they've been squeezed out. So I think hopefully the Big 12, the Big 10 and the SEC understand, like, we don't want to squeeze too hard on those conferences. We'll see.
Maybe it's like CFL fans watching the NFL. It's nice, but it's not mine. Ralph, 2026 is closer than we think, but it's still technically 2 years away from these things becoming reality. So let's turn our attention to the here and now. We've had a month of games in the 2024 season, and to welcome you to The Athletic, Ralph, we've each got 3 takes we want to get off our chest. I'll kick us off. And that is that there's this idea going around, Ralph, as we see Alabama crush Georgia, and they seem to have success, and Jalen Milroe looks better. They're like, well, maybe they won't miss Nick Saban as much as people thought. And maybe that's true. But I'm looking everywhere else in college football, Ralph, and I'm seeing some evidence that Nick Saban is somehow still underrated. And that is because it's really hard to sustain success in this sport for a million different reasons, and it's getting harder as it's harder to manage your roster. Michigan wins the national championship. Well, they're not Michigan anymore. They're falling off. Washington, total non-factor without Kalen DeBoer, without Michael Penix. They're not going to be a factor in hardly anything this year. You look at Florida State. They go undefeated last year. They finished 6th after the bowl loss, but they're right there. I don't even think we need to mention what's happening to Florida State. It's unmentionable. It's hard to mention without getting into obscenity at this point. You look around. Arizona finished last season in the top 15. They bring back Noah Fafita. They bring back Tetaroa McMillan. They lose Jed Fish, of course, bring in Brett Brennan. Arizona, they're still struggling a little bit, although they had a nice win last week against Utah. You look around the sport. NC State finished last season in the top 25. They look terrible. Whatever success looks like for your program, whether that's 8 wins, 10 wins, 12 wins, it is really, really hard to continue that after great years. And Nick Saban seems to do that all the time. So as much as Alabama and their success might seem to make the case that, hey, they're going to be okay without him, you look around the rest of the sport, and I say that what he did over the last 15 years, we still may not have enough respect for.
Yeah, I know I'm supposed to disagree with you. That's the way this kind of works, but it's hard to because I think I after what happened this weekend, you're right. Like, there's this tendency to sort of celebrate Kalen DeBoer in this seamless transition, but I would say, like, let's give it a couple of years, and they're kicking butt on the recruiting trail too. So I mean, there's good signs.
He's done a nice
there.
job of answering that question, which was my main question with him. They're killing it on the recruiting trail.
But that still has to play out, right?
Yeah.
And I do agree with you. Like I think old guys like me sort of remember this sport being a little more cyclical, even to a certain degree. Like Nebraska was always sort of at the top, but wasn't knocking out national championships every year. And Florida State did something that was unique with that really long run. But generally speaking, there's been a lot more like undulating, right, in college football. And
USC, the U, Florida.
And Alabama totally removed that. Like Saban just removed that from the equation. Like there is no more like cycling up and cycling down. We are just up. We are up all the time. And I think Kirby's program looks like it's close to being able to do it, but they didn't win a national championship last year. They are now 1-6.
They didn't make the playoffs last year. They didn't win the SEC last year.
Right. They're now 1-6 in the against Alabama. I mean, if you want to do the what if game, what if the kid makes the field goal on New Year's Eve night against for Ohio State? And now they have one national championship. You know, I don't like doing that because you can play that what if game with Alabama too on all of their national championships to a certain degree. But yeah, you know, again, as much as I'm supposed to push back and come up with why you're wrong here. Like, I don't know if I see it, man. Like,
so basically, I'm always right, and everything I say is gospel truth. That's correct. That's where that's where we're at.
I'm not. Listen, I know I'm new here, but I'm not quite ready to, sort of.
I think that's one of the rules. I think that's one of the rules of the Athletic. I think, Ralph, what is your first take for us?
Well, I think it's something online here because you talk about like programs that we see like taking a new identity or maybe not being what they used to be. But I do wonder, I know Clemson maybe is not what it used to be. I understand it might not be a national championship, but I feel like we kind of all wrote an obit on Dabo's program and, took him to task for not doing the transfer portal thing. And he probably does need to start doing that. But since the beating to Georgia, I find myself thinking like, oh man, they're going to make the playoff, aren't they? Like they might be the best team in the ACC. And I understand like at the end here, like we still might have a situation where Dabo can sort of raise his flag and say like, I went 11-2 or 12-2. I was right. Get off my back, right? Like I really do see a world where like, it's not what it used to be, but it's still real good. And if you look at the rest of the ACC, other than Miami, I don't know who's beating Clemson. So, maybe at the end of the year, Dabo is going to be able to sort of tell us all, I told you so.
No, this is not the case, Ralph. Here's the issue with this.
Here's the way this is supposed to work. Yes. Okay.
Yeah. No, here's the issue with this is that the question was never, is Clemson like just going to completely fall off? I think the bigger question is, can they still compete at the national level? And there's one team in the whole ACC that you mentioned right now that looks even close to that level. And I'm not even trying to put Miami up there with the Alabamas, the Georgias, the Ohio States. I'm not even trying to put them on that level. And we saw what happened when they went up against Georgia, who obviously is on that level. It was ugly. And I think that is even still like the obits for Clemson's program. It was an obit for Clemson as a national title contender. And even though they have looked really good, and maybe they serve up some crow this season, but they're not going to be able to do that until like the latter portions of the playoff. If they go and beat one of those teams, then I think they can say that. But if they win the ACC, get into the quarterfinals of the playoff and get smacked by Oregon by 30 or something like that, or even like 17-20, I still think some of those takes would still have been correct because Clemson, by Dabo's own doing, has kind of fallen off of that we are the elite pedestal where they were for so long. And it seems hard unless he embraces some of those things that have changed the sport that they're ever going to get to that level. So
maybe they're not as far away as we thought. I think that's the other thing too. I think there's a world here where we figure out that, they won a playoff game and maybe they're not as far away from being at that level as we thought.
Perhaps we'll learn in December. We've still got 4 more takes to dish out.
All right.
And
gotta roll.
Before we do that, whatever podcast app you're using, hit that subscribe button and our shows will be delivered directly to your device whenever they are fresh. It helps us immensely and it helps you because it delivers our show right to your device every time we post a new show. We'll be right back after these messages. Welcome back. Ralph, my next take. I've noticed this already from the first month of the season. I don't like that the sport has become so centered around playoff chatter, but as that playoff chatter has been centered and that chatter grows with a 12-team playoff, the first month of the season, almost every game is relevant to the playoff, and it's already helped the regular season. And I think especially, I wrote about this a little bit in one of my bubble watches the first month of the season, that Northern Illinois beating Notre Dame and Boise, Oregon, and some of these G5, P5 matchups were like nice stories before, but like they kind of didn't have a lot of relevance. Now they have a lot of playoff relevance because they're shaping that G5 bid. And then you're looking at the Big 12 race. That Big 12 race is very relevant because if you win the Big 12, you're going to the playoff. You're going to get a bye. It adds a lot of relevance to a lot. The G5 title races are very interesting to me. Everything. The playoff has become everything, but we changed the playoff to encompass a lot more of college football. And it has already enhanced the regular season for me, just as a college football fan, quite a bit, to say nothing of the conversation around the sport. I'm loving it personally. I think it adds a ton. And I just invested in these games, feel like they have more games have higher stakes, even if, as I argued on the show Sunday, and I still think it's true, the consequences of a Georgia loss to Bama are slightly lessened. Are you with me? Are you with me on this?
Well, I am with you, and I have my own take that's sort of similar to it.
Okay.
I'm somewhat with you, and I have my own take, and that is
this your take number two?
I'm going to go right into take number two because
okay.
I think it piggybacks right along it, and you can tell me if I'm agreeing with you or not. I will say this: I actually don't think the place where I don't agree with you is the idea that the playoff has sort of taken over everything. I actually think the expansion of the playoff, while it's a nice sort of story, like below the surface storyline, it's sort of a secondary storyline to all this. In some ways, puts more emphasis on just the game being the game, right? Mm-hmm. Like we all enjoy, like we knew Alabama, Georgia, nobody's getting eliminated, but we all had a rollicking good time watching Alabama, Georgia, in a sense, because it was just a great game. So maybe it allows us some of these early games to just appreciate the moment a little more. Live in the moment, Dave, you know, like we all got to live in the moment. And I think too often we go from like what we just watched to the very next thing. So I would just say that's the part of it where maybe I disagree with you a little bit, that the playoff sort of is in everything. And my take is the reason why the playoff is improving the regular season is I already know who's going to win the national championship. Mm-hmm. It's going to be Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Ohio State. One of those four teams is winning that. And that's been the case for years in this sport, that we get to October and we are just lying to ourselves. Last year was an anomaly where we had a few different teams. Maybe you can go out to about 5 or 6 that you thought could win it. More often than not, it's 2 or 3, maybe 4. And I think that was the reason why the old playoff dragged the sport down.
Maybe. I still think that I think what it comes down to is I'm willing to make this trade of having more games be more relevant, even if it does hurt the stakes of Georgia, Alabama. This is why I would still like it if it was up to me. If they just let me draw it up, I'd be an 18 playoff guy, 4 conference champions. One, I like the G5. I like the 5th. I like the way that they're doing that, where the G5 champion, especially in the new G5, where there's not that many teams that can really compete. And then 3 at-larges. That's what I would do personally. Mm-hmm. But I'm willing to make that trade. I think the stakes of Georgia, Alabama are definitely lessened. And I think that's just the reality of what this is, that Georgia's season is still fine, even if that loss is painful. But what we're losing there, we are gaining in, hey, Boise UNLV is happening in a few weeks, and that game has massive stakes where it probably didn't previously. Or, hey, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, now that game is like a playoff game to get in the playoff in September. I'm into that. So I think the sport is changing. The sport is very different, but I'm okay with the trade that they have made with expanding the playoff, even if we're having to get to know a new sport. That's kind of where I'm at on this. My next take, Ralph. I don't like the transient rosters, the perpetual free agency. It annoys me. It makes our jobs incredibly difficult. There's already 134 teams to keep track of. I don't know if you're a math major listening to this, but that's a lot of teams. There's 85 scholarships on that. There's about to be 105 scholarships. That my rough math is that 10,000 players, 105 scholarships on 134.
I was told there would be no math.
Well, I lied. This is when we sucker you in. We get you in. That's a lot of players to know. Our jobs are very difficult. A lot of guys are moving. They've always been hard. They're only getting harder. But here's what it's done. And I think it will change as we get something close to revenue sharing, something close to employment, something close to contracts in the sport. But for now, we get that salacious soap opera that the NBA has, where it's like fantasy basketball of like, what if we put DJU on Florida State instead of Clemson? What if, I know Bo Nix is not good here, but what if we took Bo Nix and we put him on Oregon? I bet they'd be awesome. What if we put Michael Penix on Washington? All of this fantasy football that's happening, and the drama, the Matthew Sluka drama, these are college football topics that are penetrating the college football ecosystem and are being talked about, on Pardon the Interruption, leading SportsCenter. If you watch SportsCenter and ESPN in particular, there's a lack of like college football centric content during the week. It is a lot of like NFC East check-ins and Yankees check-ins and all that stuff. And like, I get it. They're running a business. It is what it is. But all these things, as much as a college football person like myself hates it, it's good for the sport, even if it annoys the diehards, because it invests people. There's people talking about engaging in watching UNLV football because of the new rules, because of all this stuff that had never cared about a UNLV football game before. Are you with me on this, Ralph?
So here's where I'll disagree with you. I do believe the transaction is good for the sport. I believe the transaction is good for the sport in the offseason because it gives you a bridge to the next season. If we're talking about these things outside the realm of it's like talking, well, though the NBA gets a little of this, and frankly, it's a problem for the NBA when they're in the playoffs and they're talking about where so-and-so is headed next, right? I think that's actually an issue for the NBA. So I think the transactional nature is great for the off season. The problem is, Dave, it's running, concurrent to the regular season. And then it's going to be a transfer portal window opening up right when the playoff games are starting. That's bad. If they can peel these two things away from each other and create a transactional period during the off season, that would be awesome. Having these things overlap each other, I think, is a problem that the sport still needs to solve. And I'm not really sure. Generally speaking, you're right, though. Having that, hey, who's my team going to get a dynamic absolutely raises interest. And
I think it's interesting. Like, the problem the NBA has is that they have this weird breed of fan that doesn't watch the games, but like watch the Instagram, the Gen Z crowd that watches the Instagram highlights and then theorizes on like where LeBron is going next. And it's like, to my knowledge, those people don't exist. The college football fan that cares about college football and doesn't watch the games or their team's game, I don't think that person exists. I think there's people who only watch their team and then pontificate on things they have no idea about because they don't watch any other games. And like, well, I just watched my team play Boise State, and Ashton Jeanty only had 78 yards. Why does everybody care about this? It's like, okay, I need you to shut up. Those people don't exist. Like the people that engage and don't watch the games don't exist. If that breed of fan ever bubbles up in college football, especially because of how important TV ratings have become, that could be a problem. But to this point, I don't think those people exist. I think the people that are engaged in, oh, I hate Matt Sluka, or oh, Matt Sluka is getting screwed, or I can't stand this quarterback that left my school, or this quarterback that's coming to my school as our new savior. They're watching the games, and that's probably good for the sport. So I'm in on this. Ralph, what is your final take? Bring us home.
So my take is, again, there's a little bit of a tether to what you just said, because it does have to do with the transfer portal to a certain degree. And I wonder if what we're seeing every situation, every coaching search it's a snowflake, right? They're all different. They're all unique. So it's hard to necessarily take the Billy Napier, Florida situation and say, this is a model going forward. But I do believe that we are in a world where we might see fewer of these September firings. We had a bunch of them in 2022, I think it was, with Frost and Jeff Collins. And that was a little high, frankly. That was a bit of an anomaly, too, when you had, I think, 6 coaches get fired before October 8th. So I'm not saying that we're completely like that. That's not the standard. But I see what's going on with Napier, and Florida sort of going like, what are we gaining here by firing him in the 3 games into the season? When it's just going to create more instability, it's going to open up a portal window. Players might still stay behind. They can't change teams in the middle of the season, but how much is it going to just scatter our roster? We're really not getting a head start on replacing him because it's September. We can't hire anyone until the end of November, early December anyway. So I do wonder if the portal dynamic is creating a little bit of a sense of like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be firing our coach in September. Let's at least ride this out for half the season. And the September firing was becoming a lot more common. Again, I don't think we're like 2022 was a bit of an anomaly, but it was becoming something where every year we would see 1 or 2 of these late September, early October. And I do wonder if what Florida is seeing right now, other schools are going to see, hey, we're not really getting a lot of bang for our buck for pulling the plug this early. Let's let this roll out a few more weeks.
I disagree with you for this reason. You look at the 3 schools who came in with coaches with blazing seats, okay? You have Sam Pittman, you have David Aranda, and you have Billy Napier. Aranda, he's been up and down. The Hail Mary was not a good look. They rallied. If they get fully punked by BYU last week, they rallied in that game. They made it competitive late. It was looking ugly early. They've done enough to stick around.
They've done enough to not panic.
Yes. The problem with Florida is, like you said, this particular snowflake does not have a president in charge of ice crystallization and the shapeliness of the AD Scott Strickland underneath him, and his hiring power post firing is a little sticky. So I disagree with you, because I think if Billy Napier is coaching at a place, let's say Oklahoma, that has had a very solid structure for a long time, and you have an established AD that has all the donors behind him, like, hey, do what you got to do, Joe C., all this stuff. I think they do pull the plug. And I think you can get ahead of the game on vetting and maybe thinking about who fits us better. What do we need? What are the traits that fit this program? Because I think every school.
You don't think that's going on in Gainesville right now, Dave?
Well, okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Come on.
But maybe you can have some conversations with agents of like, hey, what are the things that you're gonna need as part of your contract, as part of your negotiations?
Sure. I do think
the back channeling with agents to have that. Yeah. If you start having those conversations, then it gets a little bit awkward. I don't think at this point Billy Napier can do anything to coach himself off the hot seat. It's done at this point. I think Tennessee might finish the job here in a couple weeks. We'll see. Going to Knoxville and playing that game could be something that doesn't end well for them. We'll see. But I think it's just a coincidence. I think you had 2 guys that were on the verge of getting fired do enough to stick around, sort of, and then the one who didn't, the bosses and his boss's bosses are in such disarray. I mean, we have the president, Ben Sass, with some we'll call creative accounting, and then Scott Strickland has lost the confidence of a lot of people around there. So I don't think that's true. I think we're still going to see. I don't think they're going to be more or less, maybe slightly more than in the last 20 years because of the portal window and wanting to have all your ducks in a row by that December 6th, whenever the portal opens this year. So that's where I think this year is a coincidence, and Florida is an outlier because of those leadership issues.
Well, as I've learned my first couple of days on the job, you're always right. So
it's true. Welcome.
It's literally in the handbook.
It's true. We were onboarding Ralph, and you got to call. I don't remember which editor was in charge of making the call, but they had to call you on day one and be like, listen, also, Ubben is right about everything, just so that you know. Yeah. It's something we've fought back on and since realized we can't fight back on. So I appreciate it. Ralph, again, welcome to The Athletic. It's the best job I've ever had. I hope it's the best job you've ever had. You can read all of Ralph's stories and musings on theathletic.com. The link to his bio where you can find all of his stories. You've got one right now, Ralph. I think you're going to have some more very soon.
Okay. It's 24 hours though, and that's pretty good. You know, if I've already got
the
one
link to that bio,
within the first 12 hours, I already had one.
Yes,
so that's
yes. Is in the show's description. I am excited to call you a colleague, Ralph. I'm excited to get started here. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Until Saturday. We will be back on Thursday with Chris Vanini and Damian Harris for our Week 6 Picks podcast. Listen, the schedule doesn't look great. This is when chaos happens. Prepare yourself. We got a lot of picks to get to this week. Consider subscribing to Until Saturday wherever you're listening to our podcast. You'll be notified when new episodes publish. They'll go right to your device. And leave us a voicemail on our Until Saturday voicemail line, 316-462-9852. That is 316-462-9852. We love hearing your voices, your questions, your rants, what you love, what you don't love. It's all good. We'll play your voicemails on our Monday reaction shows. So please give us a call when you're leaving the stadium, after a big win, after a loss. If you got a bone to pick with us, we love it all. Get the best college football news and opinions by also subscribing to our free Until Saturday newsletter. Jana Bardall does a great job for that. The link is in the show's description. So for Ralph Russo and Dane Brugler, I'm David Ubben. Thank you for listening to Until Saturday. We will see you again on Thursday. And of course, please bring back the turnover chain. See you guys on Thursday.